Hello friends and welcome to Smartcoach. Today we will be dealing with 1857 and one of its very important consequences. You can understand that after the British conquest or reconquest of India, after the events of 1857, by around 1858, Viceroy Canning, or he was the Governor General back then, he declared victory over the mutiny. And so in August, specifically August 2nd of 1858, the British Parliament passed a very important legislation. It is known as the Government of India Act. All right. Now remember, this is by the name itself you can understand its importance. All right, it is not a charter act. All right, and it also says something about the provisions of the Government of India Act. The name itself says something about the provision, a very fundamental provision of the Government of India Act of 1858. All right, we will get into that, but remember, the days of charter acts are gone. It is now the Government of India Act. Also, the Government of India Act of 1858 was introduced in the bill was introduced in the British Parliament by Lord Stanley, who later on became the first Secretary of State for India. All right. It was passed, as I already told you, on the 2nd of August. All right. Now, the Government of India Act of 1858 will have far-reaching consequences as far as administration of India is concerned. All right. It is with the Government of India Act of 1858 that company rule in India, the rule of Company Bahadur, is is taken back. All right. The Court of Directors and the Board of Control these were the two fundamental organizations within the East India Company who were responsible for the Indian affairs, but they would not be functioning anymore because the Indian affairs will be taken over by the British Parliament in the name of the Queen. So, with the institution of the Government of India Act of 1858, it is actually the Crown which takes possession of India. All right. It is the British Crown which takes possession over the over its Indian territories. Now, let us look at the specific provisions of the Government of India Act of 1858. All right. Number one, as I told you, dissolution of the Court of Directors and the Board of Control. All right. Court of Directors and the Board of Control both were dissolved, and now the functions of the Court of Director and the Board of Control will be assumed by a newly instituted office, and this would be the office of the Secretary of State for India. All right. Secretary of State for India. As I already told you, Lord Stanley, the first Secretary of State for India, and it would be this person who will be responsible for the Indian affairs. All right. Also, a provision, very fundamental provision of this act is that the Governor General would now be a Viceroy. All right. He would continue to function as a Governor General, but he would also have the title of a Viceroy. Now, the title Viceroy, you see, it's a vice-regal title. All right. It's you see, what it conveys is that it is half royal. All right, half royalty. That is, since now the crown has taken possession over India, a person who represents the crown in India must be, you see, from the royalty, not any commoner, or you see, any upstart from the streets cannot represent the British Queen. All right. So therefore, the person responsible for the Indian government is given the title of Viceroy. Also, you must understand that it is in his dealings with Indian princes. All right. Indian princes, that is of the princely states, it is with his dealings with the princely states that he will assume, you see, the office of the Viceroy. However, as far as internal matters of the Indian government is concerned, his functions are, you see, that of the Governor General of India. All right. Okay. As we were saying, the Secretary of State for India, the newly instituted body that has come around to overlook the affairs of India, this newly instituted body will be assisted by a council, all right, India Council. Okay, the Secretary of State for India will be assisted by a council known as the India Council. The India Council would consist of British individuals, all right, British individuals who had served in India for a particular period of time and who are now living in Britain, all right. There would be a total number of 15 members, okay. There would be a total number of 15 members in this India Council, and of this 15 members, 8 members will be nominated by the Crown, all right. 8 members would be nominated by the Crown. So this member is an these members or this council is an advisory council to the Secretary of State for India. Now you should also learn something about the importance of the Secretary of State for India. You see, otherwise imagining this office or the powers of this office would not be possible. As far as the powers of the Secretary of State for India, or what his responsibility is exactly, actually, what his responsibility is, we can understand the relation between India and Britain as being arbitrated, all right, by the Secretary of State. What I mean is that in India, if the Viceroy and his Executive Council is the chief, you see, political body, in Britain, the British Parliament is the chief political body, right? So the communications would flow from the Viceroy to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State would arbitrate with the British Parliament and vice versa, all right. So this is a structure, new structure of administration that is put in place. Now there is no board of directors, no court of directors or board of control. It is the Secretary of State, Secretary of State for India, and the India Council as his advisory body, which will assume these functions, all right. Also, you can understand that the Secretary of State for India has certain discretionary powers. That is, he can make certain secret communications without the knowledge of his councils, all right. Secret communications with India or the Parliament without the knowledge of his councils. Now this discretionary powers is there in order to have expedited decision making. Otherwise, council decision making or decision making through advice might sometimes take time, and therefore to expedite the decision making process, he can have secret communications also. Now as far as the Secretary of State for India is concerned, these are the salient points about the Secretary of State for India. Also remember that being the Secretary of State for India, he also assumes Secretary of State for India's powers over Burma, the British territories of Burma and Aden, all right. His powers would be taken away from Burma and Aden only by the Government of India Act of 1835, all right. Till then, until the Government of India Act of 1835, he remains the Secretary of State for India and the Secretary of State for Burma and Aden, which are also British territories, all right. Okay. So proceeding forward, we also know that this Secretary of State for India, his office, you see, was conceived of as a corporate entity, all right, which means that this office can be sued, all right. You can take this office to court in case of negligence of duty, and this office in turn can also sue, all right. Therefore, what happens is that the way in which the company's government was, you see, beyond the judiciary, this is not going to be anymore, okay. Judicial oversight is put over the Secretary of State for India, okay. Most important point now, coming back to the most important point which we elaborated upon right at the beginning of, you see, this video, that is the taking over of British territories by the Crown. Now, all of us are acquainted with this particular point, but what is important to remember is that since 1833, the company has not had any significant economic functions or any significant, they have had economic functions, but they do not have the monopoly functions that they used to have before. Okay, Indian trade has been pushed open or has been made open for all individuals. Okay, and therefore as far as economic importance is concerned, the East India Company is not very important. All right. Okay. But what about political importance of the East India Companies? What about its importance as a governing body for India? The East India Company, the Charter Act of 1853 particularly states that the East India Company is holding the Indian dominions in trust for the British Crown. All right, it does not belong to the East India Company, but they are holding it in trust, and the British government and the British Crown can take over these territories at any time or under any pretext necessary. Okay. Now remember, this is the clause that is invoked in order to take over the possession or take over the dominion of India. Okay, and Indian territories itself is not taken over. Okay, what is taken over is of course territory, but also the army and the revenue. All right, along with the territory, the army, the revenue, the entire bureaucratic and entire official machinery of the East India Company is taken over by the Crown through the Government of India Act of 1858. All right. Now, as we are talking about payments, the payment for these offices, all right, offices such as the Secretary of State for India, will be made from the Indian exchequer. All right, again part of the fundamental structure of the drain of wealth from India. Okay, this system also. Now, talking about the 1858 Government of India Act. All right. One important thing to remember about the Government of India Act of 1858 is that it does not alter in any way or in any fundamental manner, in any structural manner, the way in which British India was being governed at that point of time. The relationship between the three presidencies, the relationship between the official bureaucracy, etc. It does not alter anything. Okay, it only begins with the Councils Act. Okay, what the Government of India Act of 1858 is doing is altering the relationship of Indian government vis-a-vis the government in Britain. All right. As far as India is concerned, only significant changes will be made by the beginning of the Councils Act, and then going into the Government of India Act of 1909, and then Government of India Act, the Councils Act of 1909, the Government of India Act of 1919, and the Government of India Act of 1935. All right, these are important acts as far as the reorganization of Indian government, internal mechanism of the Indian government is concerned, not the Government of India Act of 1858. All right. Now, these two points can also be seen as some of the defects in the Government of India Act of, or limitations of the Government of India Act of 1858. All right. Now, also a trivia concerning the Government of India Act of 1858. You might be asked, where is the office of the Secretary of State for India? Now, remember, the office of the Secretary of State for India is known as India House, which was located at London. All right. Now, these are important things to remember, because such kind of questions based on trivia might also come. Okay. Again, talking from the perspective of mains, if you are to write an answer on the Government of India Act of 1858, more often than not you might have to give a short introduction about the Government of India Act of 1858. You might have to give a conclusion about the Government of India Act of 1858. You can give a background to the Government of India Act. What you can talk about is the centralization that was happening pre the Government of India Act of 1858. Through all of the acts, through all of the charter acts, what was happening is that the government was becoming more and more centralized, all right, previously. But it is after the Government of India Act of 1858 that the government will become more and more decentralized in India. You can talk about that in the conclusion. Having certain analytical sentences in your answer whenever you are writing something about legislations, about particular provisions of legislations, is very important. That shows the kind kind of in-depth knowledge that you have over a particular topic, okay, and that is good in all cases, all right. Do not think that it will come to be a detriment. Do not think that it will waste your time. No, it's not like that. It is good to have some extra additional knowledge which you can showcase in your answer, okay. These kind of questions are fairly common in mains, all right, in prelims, but sometimes you can also expect this kind of questions based on provisions of certain legislations in mains also. And remember, it is not important only from the historical perspective, okay. This is important as far as your syllabus of history as well as polity is concerned, all right. Company rule and crown rule are also essential part of your polity papers, and questions do come from this area also. So with that, I would like to take your leave. I hope you enjoyed the class, and I hope you learned something about the Government of India Act of 1858. Remember important provisions again. If you do a recap, number 1, transfer of power, dissolution of the Board of Control and the Court of Directors, Secretary of State for India, India Council, and the relationship between the SOS and the British Parliament. You can also talk about Viceroy. Who was the first Viceroy? Of course, it's Lord Canning, all right, who was also the Governor General during the rebellion of 1857 after Lord Dalhousie. Okay, one more thing before I leave, just a brief point about the Queen's Proclamation, all right, which was made some months after the publication of, or after the institution of, the Government of India Act of 1858. It was a proclamation made by the British Queen to the Indian princes, Indian chiefs, and the people of India in general. In this, in the Queen's Proclamation, the basic fundamental responsibilities and basic fundamental changes that the British government would from then on bring in India, this is an elaboration of those particular points. We will deal with the Queen's Proclamation in a separate short video, all right, but stay tuned to Smartcoach so as to be able to go through such videos and also take notes whenever you are looking at these videos, all right. With that, I take your leave and thank you.